To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Vincent Morrison had built his empire brick by brick, starting with nothing but a high school diploma and an unshakable belief that weakness was a luxury he couldn't afford. At 52, he owned Morrison Construction, a company that had transformed half the skyline of Denver. His calloused hands, weathered from years of manual labor before he became the man signing the checks, still bore the scars of his climb to the top. 25 years ago, he'd met Candace Fletcher at a charity gala, one of those events he'd attended reluctantly, knowing that connections mattered as much as concrete in his business. She was radiant, 23 to his 27, with honey blonde hair and a laugh that could light up a room. More importantly, she came from old money, the kind that opened doors Vincent's blue-collar background never could. Their courtship was swift and passionate. Candace seemed fascinated by his raw ambition, his stories of working construction sites in sub-zero temperatures to save enough money for his first project. She'd trace the scars on his knuckles and call him her diamond in the rough. Within a year, they were married in a ceremony that cost more than Vincent's first house. The early years were golden. Vincent's business flourished, partly due to his relentless work ethic and partly due to the connections Candace's family provided. When their daughter Nicole was born, Vincent felt complete. He'd wake up at dawn, spend 12 hours overseeing construction sites, then come home to read bedtime stories, his work boots still caked with mud. But success changed Candace. As Vincent's wealth grew, so did her sense of entitlement. The woman who once found his work-hardened hands attractive now wrinkled her nose when he came home dirty. She began spending more time at country clubs and spa retreats, surrounding herself with people who'd never worked a day in their lives. "You're embarrassing me, Vince," she'd hiss after social events. "Mr. Ashford's wife was mortified when you started talking about concrete tensile strength at dinner. Can't you just blend in?" Vincent tried, for Nicole's sake. He bought expensive suits, learned to play golf, even hired a speech coach to soften his working-class accent. But it was never enough. The harder he tried to fit into Candace's world, the more she seemed to resent the effort it required. Their sex life, once passionate and frequent, became perfunctory. Candace would lie there checking her phone, making grocery lists in her head while Vincent moved above her. When he tried to talk about it, she'd deflect. "I'm tired, Vince. Running a household is exhausting." But Vincent noticed things. The new lingerie that never appeared in their bedroom. The way she suddenly became interested in fitness, hiring a personal trainer, and spending hours at the gym. The secretive phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room. Nicole, now 22 and graduating from Harvard with a degree in international relations, had become Candace's ally in ways that cut Vincent to the bone. His daughter, who used to wait by the window for his truck to pull into the driveway, now barely looked up from her phone when he spoke. "Dad, you're so embarrassing," Nicole would say whenever he showed pride in his business. "Do you have to tell everyone you're in construction? Can't you just say you're in development?" The final blow had come 3 months ago, during a family dinner at the country club. Vincent had been telling a story about a particularly challenging build when Nicole interrupted. "God, Dad, nobody cares about your blue-collar war stories. This isn't a construction site." The words were said with the same dismissive tone Candace used, and Vincent realized his own daughter had learned to be ashamed of him. That night, Vincent made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He installed discreet surveillance equipment throughout their Aspen mansion, not because he suspected anything specific, but because 25 years in business had taught him that knowledge was power, and power was the only thing that mattered when everything else failed. The camera feeds, accessible through an app on his phone, revealed a truth that shattered the last vestiges of the man who'd once believed in second chances. Chapter 2. The Discovery. Vincent was reviewing construction reports in his downtown office when the notification chimed on his phone. Motion detected in the master bedroom at 2:17 p.m. Candace was supposed to be at her book club, and Nicole was at Harvard. He almost dismissed it, probably just the cleaning lady. But something made him open the app. The feed showed Candace in their bedroom, but she wasn't alone. Derek Mills, the head athletic trainer at the country club, was kissing her with the kind of passion Vincent hadn't seen from his wife in years. Vincent recognized Derek immediately, 38 years old, divorced, with the kind of lean muscle that came from a lifetime of sports rather than manual labor. Vincent's coffee mug shattered against the office wall as he watched his wife of 24 years arch her back under another man's touch. But it wasn't just the physical betrayal that destroyed him. It was the way Candace laughed, the way she looked at Derek with genuine desire, the way she whispered things Vincent couldn't hear but could read in her expression. He saved the video file and continued watching the feeds over the following weeks. The affair wasn't new. Derek's familiarity with their house, the way he moved through their bedroom, suggested this had been going on for months, possibly years. But the real devastation came when he discovered Nicole's role in the deception. She's at some boring business dinner, he heard Nicole tell Derek during one of their encounters. Dad thinks he's so important with his construction company. Mom deserves better than some wannabe who got lucky. Vincent listened to his daughter facilitate his wife's betrayal, providing alibis and cover stories. The girl he'd read bedtime stories to, whose Harvard tuition he'd paid without question, was actively working against him. The breaking point came when he overheard Candace and Derek discussing their future. After Nicole graduates, we'll make our move, Derek was saying. You'll get half of everything in the divorce, maybe more if we can prove he's been neglecting you emotionally. Candace laughed, that same musical sound that had once made Vincent's heart race. Vincent's so predictable. He'll probably grovel and beg me to come back. He doesn't understand that I've outgrown him. What about Morrison Construction? Derek asked. That company is half mine. I've been married to him for 24 years, suffered through his embarrassing behavior, his crude friends, his complete lack of sophistication. I deserve compensation for what I've endured. Vincent turned off the feed and sat in his office as Denver's skyline glittered beyond his windows. Buildings he'd constructed, deals he'd negotiated, an empire he'd built with his bare hands, and they saw it all as something they were entitled to take. But Candace and Derek had made a critical error. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. Vincent Morrison hadn't clawed his way out of poverty by being forgiving. He hadn't built a multi-million-dollar company by being understanding. And he certainly hadn't survived 25 years in the cutthroat world of construction by being the kind of man who rolled over when betrayed. They wanted to see what Vincent Morrison was really capable of. He'd be happy to show them. As he began planning, Vincent felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest, the same ruthless calculation that had driven him to success. Candace and Derek thought they knew him, thought he was just some working-class fool who'd gotten lucky. They were about to learn that the most dangerous men are those who've built everything from nothing and have absolutely nothing left to lose. Chapter 3, The Graduation Gambit. The text message arrived 3 days before Nicole's Harvard graduation. Vincent, I've decided you're not welcome at Nicole's graduation. Your presence would be inappropriate given our current situation. If you want to see your failure of a father get recognized, you can watch the live stream from your trailer, loser. See. Vincent stared at the message in his downtown office, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows. The casual cruelty of it, calling him a failure, referencing a trailer when they lived in a $6 million mansion he'd built, revealed just how little respect Candace had left for him. But it was the phrase, our current situation, that caught his attention. As far as Candace knew, Vincent was oblivious to her affair, which meant she was manufacturing drama, creating justification for whatever move she was planning. Vincent's phone buzzed with another message, this one from Nicole. Dad, maybe it's better if you don't come. Mom's really upset about things. I'll send you pictures. His own daughter, the child he'd carried on his shoulders through countless construction sites, who'd worn his hard hat like a crown when she was 5, was now actively excluding him from one of the most important days of her life. Vincent typed back to Candace, sure. Enjoy your big day. The response was deliberately underwhelming, designed to frustrate. Candace thrived on drama, on emotional reactions she could use to paint herself as the victim. She wanted him to fight, to plead, to give her ammunition for whatever narrative she was constructing. Instead, Vincent spent the next 2 days implementing phase 1 of his plan. Morrison Construction had connections throughout New England, subcontractors, suppliers, even security firms. With a few carefully placed calls, Vincent arranged for surveillance on the graduation ceremony. Not for himself, but for the intelligence he'd need later. He also made other preparations. Derek Mills, he'd learned, was more than just a trainer. The man was leveraged to his eyeballs, expensive divorce settlement, a gambling problem he thought he'd hidden, and a luxury lifestyle funded entirely by credit. Derek was living off the promise of Candace's future divorce settlement, believing he'd hit the jackpot. On graduation morning, Vincent's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Candace's name flashed on the screen again and again. He let it go to voicemail, instead watching the live feed from the graduation ceremony on his laptop. There was Candace in the audience, wearing the diamond necklace he'd bought for their 20th anniversary, her face tight with anxiety as she kept checking her phone. Derek sat beside her, looking uncomfortable in an ill-fitting suit. Nicole was somewhere in the sea of graduates, about to receive a degree Vincent had funded entirely. His phone buzzed with a text from Candace. "Pick up your damn phone." Then another. "Vincent, this is important." And another. "Something's happened. Call me." Vincent smiled coldly and closed his laptop. He had work to do. The something that had happened was already in motion. At exactly 7 a.m., Derek Mills had received a call from his bank informing him that his credit cards had been suspended pending a fraud investigation. By 8 a.m., his apartment building's management company, a firm that subcontracted through Morrison Construction, had served him with eviction papers for violation of his lease agreement. By 9 a.m., Derek's ex-wife had received an anonymous tip about hidden assets, complete with documentation of Derek's gambling debts and expensive purchases. Her lawyer was already filing motions to reopen their divorce settlement. But Vincent was just getting started. At 10 a.m., as Nicole walked across the graduation stage, Vincent was in a meeting with Patricia Donnelly, the wife of Denver's largest commercial real estate developer. Patricia, as it turned out, was very interested in the photos Vincent had of her husband Derek's recent activities. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Vincent," Patricia said, her voice ice-cold as she reviewed the evidence. "Derek always was too clever for his own good. I believe my husband and I need to have a conversation about restructuring our business relationships." Vincent nodded. Derek Mills was about to discover that the construction industry was a very small world, and Vincent Morrison had a very long memory. By the time Candace's frantic calls finally stopped, Vincent had already set in motion a chain of events that would systematically destroy every aspect of Derek Mills' life. The graduation ceremony was just the beginning. That evening, Vincent opened a bottle of 25-year-old scotch, the same vintage he'd bought to celebrate his wedding, and toasted his own reflection in the window. "To new beginnings," he said aloud. His phone remained silent for the first time in months. Chapter 4. The Professional Ruin. Derek Mills woke up the Monday after graduation to find his world collapsing in systematic waves. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor at the country club. "Need to see you in my office." Immediately. By the time Derek arrived, still groggy and confused, the club's general manager, Robert Hayes, was sitting with a grim expression and a thick folder. "Derek, we've received some concerning information about your conduct with club members," Hayes began. "Specifically, allegations of inappropriate relationships that violate your employment contract." Derek's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "I haven't. Mrs. Patricia Donnelly has filed a formal complaint. She has photographic evidence of you entering her home while her husband was away on business." Hayes slid a photo across the desk. Derek's car in the Donnelly driveway, time-stamped 3 weeks ago. "That's not what it looks like," Derek protested, but his voice lacked conviction. He had been at Patricia's house, but not for the reason they suspected. Patricia Donnelly had hired him for private training sessions, or so he'd thought. Now he realized he'd been set up. "There's more," Hayes continued. "We've also received documentation of gambling debts you've incurred using club connections. The Riverside Casino has provided records showing you've been using club member recommendations to secure credit lines." Derek felt the walls closing in. The casino documents were real. He had used his position to get introductions to high-stakes games. But how had anyone found out? "Effective immediately, your employment is terminated," Hayes announced. "Security will escort you out. Your final paycheck will be held pending our investigation into possible theft of club property." As Derek was walked out through the main dining room, he saw several club members watching with interest. Word traveled fast in this crowd, and by evening, every country club in the city would know Derek Mills was persona non grata. But Vincent wasn't finished. Derek's apartment building, as it turned out, was owned by a subsidiary of Denver Development Group, whose primary contractor was Morrison Construction. The eviction notice Derek had received was just the beginning. By Tuesday, building management had also filed a police report claiming Derek had been subletting his apartment illegally and running an unlicensed personal training business from the premises. Wednesday brought worse news. Derek's ex-wife's lawyer had filed new motions revealing that Derek had hidden significant assets during their divorce, specifically, expensive gifts he'd received from clients. The fact that these gifts came from Candace Morrison was documented in detail, complete with credit card receipts and photos from Candace's social media. How did they get this information? Derek demanded during a heated phone call with Candace. I don't know. Candace's voice was shrill with panic. Vincent can't possibly know about us. He's not that smart. But Derek was beginning to understand exactly how smart Vincent Morrison really was. Thursday brought the final blow. Derek arrived at his lawyer's office to find the man pale and sweating. Derek, I have to withdraw as your counsel, the lawyer announced. There's been a conflict of interest discovered. What kind of conflict? My firm has a long-standing relationship with Morrison Construction. We've handled their contract negotiations for years. I can't represent you in any matter that might involve Vincent Morrison. Derek stared at him. You think Vincent Morrison is behind this? The lawyer's silence was answer enough. By Friday, Derek Mills had lost his job, his apartment, and his legal representation. His credit was ruined, his reputation destroyed, and his ex-wife was demanding a forensic accounting of every penny he'd spent in the last 2 years. But the cruelest blow came Saturday morning, when Derek received a single text message from an unknown number. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. You haven't seen anything yet. VM. Derek tried calling Candace, but her phone went straight to voicemail. When he drove to the Morrison mansion, the gates were locked, and a security guard he didn't recognize told him he wasn't welcome on the property. Vincent Morrison, it seemed, had been planning this methodical destruction for longer than Derek had imagined. And Derek was beginning to realize that everything he thought he knew about Candace's husband had been catastrophically wrong. The man wasn't just some blue-collar success story who'd gotten lucky. Vincent Morrison was a predator who'd been waiting patiently for his prey to make a mistake. And Derek Mills had walked right into the trap. Chapter 5, The Family Fracture. Nicole Morrison returned from her graduation weekend to find her family home transformed into an armed camp. Security guards patrolled the grounds, new cameras monitored every entrance, and her mother was pacing the marble foyer like a caged animal. Nicole, thank God you're here. Candace rushed to embrace her daughter. Something terrible is happening. Your father has lost his mind. Nicole set down her suitcases, still wearing her Harvard sweatshirt. What are you talking about? Derek, you remember Derek from the club? He's being systematically destroyed. Someone is sabotaging every aspect of his life, and I think it's your father. Nicole frowned. She'd never particularly liked Derek Mills. The man was too smooth, too eager to please, and she'd noticed the way he looked at her mother. But she also didn't understand why her father would care about some trainer. Why would Dad target Derek? Nicole asked carefully. Candace's face flushed. Because Derek and I have become close. Your father must have found out somehow. The admission hung in the air between them. Nicole had suspected something was going on. Her mother's sudden interest in fitness, the way she dressed for gym sessions, the secretive phone calls. But having it confirmed was different. Mom, are you having an affair? It's not that simple, Nicole. Your father and I, we've grown apart. He's not the man I married. Derek understands me in ways your father never has. Nicole sank into one of the antique chairs her mother had imported from France. How long has this been going on? About 2 years, Candace admitted. But Nicole, you have to understand, I've been unhappy for so much longer. Your father embarrasses me at every social function. He has no refinement, no culture. I've tried to help him grow, but he's determined to remain what he is. Nicole thought about her father, the man who'd taught her to drive in empty parking lots, who'd attended every school play and parent-teacher conference, who'd never once made her feel like his success wasn't worth sharing with her. But she also remembered how he'd changed over the years, becoming more distant, working longer hours, seeming almost like a stranger in his own home. What do you want me to do? Nicole asked. Talk to him. Make him understand that his behavior is destroying this family. If he continues targeting Derek, I'll have no choice but to file for divorce. Nicole found her father in his study that evening, reviewing construction blueprints with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. Vincent looked up as she entered, and for a moment, his expression softened. "How was graduation?" he asked. "Dad, we need to talk about what's happening with Mom and Derek." Vincent set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "What about them? Don't play dumb. Mom told me about their relationship, and she thinks you're sabotaging Derek's life." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "What do you think I should do about your mother's affair, Nicole?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. Maybe marriage counseling? Try to work things out." "Work things out," Vincent repeated slowly. "Your mother has been sleeping with another man for 2 years. She's stolen from our home to buy him gifts. She's used you to provide alibis for her betrayal. And you think we should work things out?" Nicole felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I never. You told Derek when I wouldn't be home. You covered for your mother's absences. You made jokes about my business, my background, my worth as a man, all while knowing what was really happening." The words hit Nicole like a physical blow. She had done those things, but she'd told herself it was just harmless. She hadn't really thought about the consequences. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "You're 22 years old, Nicole. You're not a child anymore. Your choices have consequences." Vincent stood up, suddenly looking older than his 52 years. "Your mother wants a divorce? She can have one. But she won't be taking half of what I've built to start a new life with her boyfriend." "What does that mean?" "It means your mother is about to learn that I didn't become successful by being forgiving. It means Derek Mills is about to discover what happens when you target the wrong man's family. And it means you need to decide whose side you're on, because neutrality isn't an option anymore." Nicole left the study feeling shaken. She'd expected her father to be hurt, maybe angry, but willing to fight for their family. Instead, she'd encountered something cold and implacable, a man who'd already written them off and moved on to consequences. That night, Nicole heard her parents arguing through the walls of the mansion. "You destroyed his life," Candace was screaming. "Derek lost everything because of you." "Derek Mills lost everything because he thought he could steal from me without consequences," Vincent replied calmly. "Just like you're about to learn the same lesson. I want a divorce. You'll get one, but not the kind you're expecting." Nicole pulled her pillow over her head, but she could still hear the sound of her family tearing itself apart. And for the first time, she began to wonder if she'd chosen the wrong side in a war she'd helped start. Chapter 6. The Legal Trap. Candace Morrison sat across from the most expensive divorce attorney in Denver, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Kellerman who specialized in high-asset dissolutions. The law office occupied the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, and through the windows, Candace could see several buildings bearing Morrison construction signs. "Based on what you've told me, Mrs. Morrison, you should be entitled to a substantial settlement," Kellerman said, reviewing her notes. 24 years of marriage, your contributions to the business through social connections, your role as homemaker and mother. Colorado is an equitable distribution state, so we're looking at potentially 40 to 50% of all marital assets. Candace smiled for the first time in weeks. "Vincent thinks he can intimidate me, but I know my rights." "Tell me about your husband's business assets," Kellerman continued. "Morrison Construction, real estate holdings, investment accounts?" "Vincent's very secretive about the details, but I know the company is worth at least $50 million. We have the house in Aspen, worth about $6 million, plus investment properties, stock portfolios, retirement accounts." Kellerman made notes. "And you mentioned there might be some personal conduct issues that could work in our favor?" "Vincent has become increasingly controlling and emotionally abusive," Candace said, practicing the lines she'd rehearsed. "He's isolated me from friends, criticized my every move, and made me feel worthless. I have a witness who can testify to his behavior." What Candace didn't know was that Linda Kellerman's law firm had received a very interesting call 3 days earlier. Vincent Morrison had contacted them not to hire their services, but to inform them of a potential conflict of interest. It seemed Morrison Construction had recently acquired the building that housed Kellerman's firm. As the new landlord, Vincent thought it was only fair to disclose that his wife might be seeking their services. "Of course, I wouldn't want to interfere with your business," Vincent had said smoothly. "But I thought you should know that Candace might not be entirely forthcoming about her own conduct during our marriage." Now, As Kellerman listened to Candace's story, she was acutely aware that her client was omitting crucial information. Mrs. Morrison, I have to ask, have you been involved with anyone else during your marriage? Candace's hesitation was brief but telling. No, of course not. I've been faithful to Vincent despite his treatment of me. Kellerman made another note. And you're confident there's no evidence that might contradict that statement? Absolutely. 3 hours later, Kellerman received a package at her office. Inside were copies of surveillance footage, credit card statements, phone records, and photographs documenting Candace Morrison's 2-year affair with Derek Mills. The evidence was thorough, time-stamped, and legally obtained. The accompanying note was brief. Mrs. Morrison seems to have forgotten some details. I thought you should have the complete picture before proceeding. V. Morrison. Kellerman stared at the evidence for a long time. In Colorado, adultery wasn't supposed to affect property division, but it certainly affected credibility. More importantly, the financial records showed that Candace had used marital funds to purchase expensive gifts for her lover. Legally, that was dissipation of marital assets. But the real problem was that Candace had just lied to her attorney, claiming she'd been faithful when she knew there was evidence to the contrary. Kellerman's phone rang. Ms. Kellerman? This is Vincent Morrison. I was wondering if you'd had a chance to review the materials I sent over. Mr. Morrison, I can't discuss your wife's case with you. Of course not. I'm actually calling to offer your firm a proposition. Morrison Construction is expanding our legal team. We're looking for a firm to handle all our contract negotiations, property acquisitions, and corporate litigation. It would be a very lucrative retainer. The implication was clear. Kellerman could either represent Candace in what was now obviously a problematic case, or she could secure a multi-million-dollar corporate client for her firm. I'll need to discuss this with my partners, Kellerman said carefully. Naturally. Take your time. The next morning, Candace received a call from Kellerman's office. Mrs. Morrison, I'm afraid we can't represent you after all. A conflict of interest has arisen. What kind of conflict? I can't discuss the details, but I'd recommend you find other counsel as soon as possible. Candace spent the next week calling every major divorce attorney in Denver. The conversations followed the same pattern. I'm sorry, Mrs. Morrison, but our firm has a conflict of interest. Unfortunately, we can't take your case due to existing client relationships. I'm afraid there's been a potential conflict identified. By the end of the week, Candace realized that Vincent had somehow poisoned the well. Every top-tier divorce attorney in the city was suddenly unavailable. Finally, she found representation with a small firm that specialized in personal injury cases. Her new attorney, fresh out of law school and eager for any client, assured her they could handle a divorce case. But when they filed the initial petition, Vincent's response was swift and devastating. His attorney, the senior partner at Denver's most prestigious law firm, filed a counterpetition that included not only the evidence of Candace's affair, but detailed documentation of her dissipation of marital assets. The filing requested that Candace be held responsible for reimbursing Derek Mills' expenses from community property. More damaging still, Vincent had filed for separation of assets based on a premarital agreement Candace had forgotten she'd signed 24 years earlier. The agreement, buried in the paperwork of their wedding planning, severely limited her claim to business assets acquired after the marriage. How is this possible? Candace demanded of her young attorney. I'm afraid Mr. Morrison's legal team is very thorough, the lawyer replied, looking overwhelmed. They're arguing that your affair and the financial gifts to Mr. Mills constitute abandonment of the marriage and breach of fiduciary duty. For the first time, Candace began to understand that she'd been outmaneuvered by a man she'd consistently underestimated. Vincent Morrison wasn't just angry. He was playing a game she didn't even know had started, and he was already several moves ahead. Chapter 7. The Public Humiliation. The Denver Country Club's annual charity gala was the social event of the season, a gathering of the city's elite in the club's opulent ballroom. Candace Morrison had been planning to attend for months, viewing it as her public debut as a soon-to-be divorced woman. She'd bought a new dress, made appointments for hair and nails, and planned to arrive with Derek Mills as her date. Instead, she found herself watching the live stream from her bedroom as her world collapsed in real time. Vincent Morrison had not only attended the gala, he'd been invited as the evening's keynote speaker, recognized for Morrison Construction's charitable contributions to Denver's housing initiatives. Candace watched in horror as her husband, dressed in an impeccably tailored tuxedo, took the stage to thunderous applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vincent began, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom. "Tonight is about celebrating our community's commitment to family values and integrity." The speech was masterful, weaving together themes of hard work, loyalty, and the importance of maintaining moral standards in both business and personal relationships. Vincent spoke about building foundations, literal and metaphorical, and the devastating consequences when those foundations are corrupted by deception. "Some of you may have heard that my family is going through a difficult time," Vincent said, his voice taking on a more personal tone. "It's painful when people you trust, people you've supported and loved, choose to betray that trust. But I believe in accountability. I believe that actions have consequences." The audience was riveted. This wasn't the typical charity gala speech. "My wife Candace couldn't be here tonight," Vincent continued. "She's occupied with other matters. Legal matters, as it happens. You see, when someone chooses to violate the sacred bonds of marriage, when they choose to steal from their family to support their infidelity, well, that's not just a personal betrayal. That's a crime." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Candace felt sick. "I want to thank those of you who brought my wife's affair to my attention," Vincent said. "Patricia Donnelly, thank you for your integrity in reporting Derek Mills' inappropriate conduct. Robert Hayes, thank you for maintaining the club's standards by terminating Mr. Mills. And Linda Kellerman, thank you for your ethical handling of the conflict of interest in this situation." Candace realized with growing horror that Vincent had orchestrated everything. The people she'd thought were random obstacles were actually his allies. "Some might ask why I'm sharing such personal information tonight," Vincent continued. "It's because I believe this community deserves to know who among us maintains integrity and who does not. My wife, Candace Morrison, has spent 2 years conducting an affair while living off the success of our construction company. She used company credit cards to buy gifts for her lover. She lied to our daughter about her whereabouts. She violated every principle this community claims to value." The ballroom was dead silent now. Derek Mills, formerly employed by this very club, participated in this deception. He used his position to gain access to members' homes, violated the trust placed in him, and engaged in fraudulent financial activities. Both of them believed they could deceive me, steal from me, and face no consequences. Vincent paused, letting his words sink in. They were wrong. The audience erupted in applause. Candace watched through tears as Denver's social elite, people she'd considered friends, gave her husband a standing ovation for publicly destroying her reputation. But Vincent wasn't finished. "I want to announce tonight that Morrison Construction will be establishing the Family Integrity Foundation, dedicated to supporting the victims of adultery and financial fraud. We'll be providing legal assistance, counseling services, and emergency housing for those betrayed by unfaithful spouses." More applause. "And I want to personally invite Derek Mills, who I understand is in the audience tonight, to be our first client. Derek, you look like you could use some emergency housing assistance." The cameras found Derek Mills sitting at a table near the back, his face ashen. He'd come to the gala hoping to network, to find some way to rebuild his reputation. Instead, he was being publicly destroyed in front of everyone who mattered in Denver society. "Actually," Vincent continued, "I believe Derek is about to need more than housing assistance. You see, my investigation into his conduct revealed some interesting information about tax evasion, fraud, and other criminal activities. Information I've shared with the appropriate authorities." Derek Mills stood up abruptly and headed for the exit, but the doors were blocked by men in suits who looked suspiciously like federal agents. Candace watched in real time as her lover was arrested on live television, the charges reading like a catalog of financial crimes: tax evasion, wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. The final blow came when Vincent returned to the podium. "One last announcement," he said. "My daughter Nicole, who graduated from Harvard last month, has decided to pursue a career in social work, helping families destroyed by infidelity. Nicole, would you stand up and take a bow?" The camera found Nicole at Vincent's table, tears streaming down her face as she stood to acknowledge the applause. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't the one Candace had expected. Nicole understands that loyalty isn't just a word. It's a choice we make every day. She's chosen to honor the family that raised her, educated her, and loved her unconditionally. As the gala ended, Candace sat alone in her bedroom, watching Denver's social elite congratulate her husband while she became a pariah. Her phone had been buzzing with texts all evening, but they weren't messages of support. "Candace, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but I think it's best if you don't attend our book club anymore. Martha, the tennis tournament committee has decided to move in a different direction this year. Susan, I think some distance would be appropriate given the circumstances. Jessica." One by one, Candace was being erased from the social world she'd spent decades cultivating. Vincent hadn't just destroyed her legally and financially, he'd made her a social outcast. And the night was far from over. Chapter 8, The Final Stroke. Derek Mills sat in a federal holding cell, still wearing his tuxedo from the country club gala. The charges against him were serious. The FBI had discovered a complex web of identity theft and financial fraud spanning several years. Using his position at the country club, Derek had been stealing members' personal information and using it to secure fraudulent loans and credit lines. What Derek didn't know was that Vincent Morrison had been aware of these activities for months and had carefully documented every transaction while building an airtight case. "Mr. Mills," the federal prosecutor said during Derek's arraignment, "you're facing 47 counts of federal fraud. The evidence against you is overwhelming. However, there might be an opportunity for cooperation." Derek's court-appointed attorney leaned forward. "What kind of cooperation?" "Vincent Morrison has provided us with evidence of additional criminal activity involving your associate, Candace Morrison. Financial fraud, money laundering, conspiracy. If you're willing to testify against Mrs. Morrison, we might be able to work out a deal." Derek stared at the prosecutor. Even now, locked up and facing decades in prison, Vincent Morrison was still manipulating events from the shadows. Meanwhile, Candace was discovering that her legal troubles were just beginning. The IRS had launched an investigation into her personal finances, specifically focusing on the expensive gifts she'd purchased for Derek. The agency claimed these constituted unreported income for Derek and potential tax fraud for Candace. Mrs. Morrison, her inexperienced attorney explained, "The government is treating your gifts to Mr. Mills as a conspiracy to evade taxes. They're saying you helped him hide income. That's ridiculous. They were gifts. Gifts over the annual exclusion limit require reporting. Some of the items you purchased, the Rolex, the vacation package, the car payments, total over $200,000. The IRS wants to know why these weren't reported as gifts." Candace felt the walls closing in. She'd been so focused on hiding the affair that she'd never considered the legal implications of her spending. But Vincent's masterstroke was yet to come. 3 weeks after the gala, Candace received a visit from Nicole, who looked pale and shaken. "Mom, we need to talk," Nicole said, sitting across from Candace in the mansion's formal living room. "Nicole, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I need you to understand." "I understand perfectly," Nicole interrupted. "Dad showed me everything. The surveillance footage, the financial records, the timeline of your affair. I understand that you used me to betray him." Candace felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Nicole, you don't understand the whole situation. I understand that you spent my college fund on gifts for Derek Mills." The words hit Candace like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "The Harvard tuition, Mom. Dad showed me the records. You took money from my education fund to buy Derek expensive gifts. Dad had to use business assets to cover my tuition because you'd stolen my college money." Candace's mind reeled. The education fund had been in her name, and she'd accessed it during the past 2 years when her personal spending had gotten out of control. She'd planned to replace the money before Nicole graduated, but "You stole from your own daughter to fund your affair," Nicole continued, her voice breaking. "Dad paid for my education twice because of your selfishness." "Nicole, I was going to replace that money." "With what?" "Your divorce settlement." Nicole stood up, her hands shaking. "Do you know what Dad told me? He said he'd rather give you everything than let you think you'd won. But then he realized you'd just steal from other people, hurt other families. So he decided to make sure you'd never have the opportunity again." Candace looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and saw Vincent's cold determination reflected in Nicole's eyes. "I'm testifying against you in the divorce proceedings," Nicole said quietly. "About the stolen tuition money, about my role in covering for your affair, about everything. Dad says it's important that I take responsibility for my choices." "Nicole, please. I chose to help you betray him, Mom." Now I'm choosing to make it right. Nicole moved toward the door, then paused. Dad offered to pay for law school if I wanted to continue my education. He said he believes in second chances for people who earn them. And what about me? Candace whispered. Don't I get a second chance? Nicole's expression was heartbreakingly sad. You had 24 years of chances, Mom. You chose to waste them. After Nicole left, Candace sat alone in the mansion that would soon be taken from her. Vincent had systematically destroyed her lover, turned their daughter against her, ruined her reputation, and ensured that she'd face criminal charges. But the cruelest blow was still to come. That evening, Candace found an envelope on her pillow. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a job application for a housekeeping position at a budget motel on the outskirts of Denver. At the bottom, in Vincent's handwriting, was a note. I thought you might need this. The owner is a friend of mine. He's willing to give you a chance, assuming you pass the background check. Consider it my final gift to the woman I once loved. V. Candace crumpled the paper, then smoothed it out again. Tomorrow, she would lose the house, the cars, the social standing, everything she'd taken for granted. Vincent Morrison had destroyed her life as methodically and completely as he'd built his construction empire, one carefully planned move at a time. And the most devastating part was that she was beginning to understand she deserved every bit of it. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 6 months later, Vincent Morrison stood in his office, looking out at the Denver skyline he'd helped shape. The morning newspaper lay open on his desk, featuring a front-page story about Derek Mills' sentencing, 15 years in federal prison for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Candace had received 5 years for her role in the scheme, though she'd ultimately avoided the worst charges by cooperating with prosecutors. She was currently serving her sentence at a minimum security facility, and according to Vincent's sources, had become a model prisoner, working in the prison library and teaching literacy classes. Vincent felt no satisfaction in her punishment. Candace had made her choices, and consequences had followed. That was simply how the world worked. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Come in. Nicole entered, wearing a business suit and carrying a briefcase. At 23, she'd grown into a formidable woman, her Harvard education supplemented by a year of working in victim advocacy. The Family Integrity Foundation board meeting is in an hour, she said, setting files on his desk. We've received applications from 47 families this month. Vincent nodded. The foundation had become his primary focus outside of Morrison Construction, providing legal and financial assistance to families destroyed by infidelity and fraud. Nicole served as its executive director, a role that seemed to suit her natural intelligence and newly developed sense of justice. Any interesting cases? Vincent asked. There's a construction worker in Colorado Springs whose wife emptied their retirement accounts to support her gambling addiction and boyfriend. Another case involves a teacher whose husband used their children's college funds to invest in his brother's failing business. Vincent reviewed the files. Each case was different, but the underlying theme was always the same. Trust betrayed, foundations shattered, families destroyed by selfishness and deception. Approve them all, he said. Make sure they get the best legal representation available. Nicole smiled, something she'd been doing more frequently in recent months. The foundation has helped over 300 families so far. The success rate for favorable legal outcomes is 92%. Good. What about our scholarship program? 18 students from broken homes received full rides to college this year. All of them are maintaining GPAs above 3.5. Vincent felt something that might have been pride. The scholarships were targeted specifically at children whose families had been destroyed by infidelity or financial betrayal. Young people who'd learned early that actions had consequences but still deserved the chance to build better lives. There's something else, Nicole said, her tone becoming more serious. I received a letter from Mom. Vincent's expression didn't change. What did she say? She wants to see you. She's asking for forgiveness. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. What do you think I should do? I think, Nicole said carefully, that forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for the other person. But I also think that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. Vincent nodded. Nicole had learned hard lessons about loyalty and consequences. She understood that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. Did you respond to her letter? I told her that she made her choices, and now she has to live with them. Just like I'm living with mine. Nicole's voice was steady. I chose to help her betray you, Dad. I can't undo that, but I can make sure I never make that kind of choice again. And Derek Mills? He writes letters too, begging for money, claiming he was manipulated, asking for help with his appeal. Nicole's expression hardened. I forward them to the trash. Vincent smiled coldly. Derek Mills would spend the next 15 years learning what it meant to target the wrong man's family. By the time he was released, he'd be in his mid-50s, his reputation destroyed, his prospects limited to whatever work ex-felons could find. The board meeting, Nicole reminded him. Right. Before we go, I have news. Morrison Construction is expanding into Arizona and New Mexico. I want you to consider relocating to Phoenix to oversee the foundation's expansion. Nicole raised an eyebrow. Trying to get rid of me? Trying to give you the opportunity to build something of your own. The foundation is becoming larger than what one office can handle. You've proven you can run this operation. Now I want to see what you can build from scratch. Nicole considered this. What about you? I'll be fine. I have a business to run, and there are always more people who need to learn that actions have consequences. That afternoon, as Vincent sat in the foundation's board meeting, listening to Nicole present statistics on their success rates, he reflected on the past year. He'd lost a wife and gained back a daughter. He'd destroyed 2 people who'd betrayed him and helped hundreds of others who'd been betrayed. Most importantly, he'd proven to himself that Vincent Morrison, the construction worker's son who'd built an empire with his bare hands, would never again be anyone's victim. After the meeting, Vincent walked through downtown Denver, past buildings he'd constructed, businesses he'd helped establish, a city he'd helped shape. People recognized him now, nodding respectfully as he passed. The story of his ruthless response to betrayal had become legend in Denver's business community. Vincent Morrison was known as a man who kept his word, honored his contracts, and destroyed anyone who crossed him. It was a reputation he'd earned and intended to maintain. His phone buzzed with a text from Nicole. Dad, the Phoenix position sounds perfect. When do I start? Vincent smiled as he typed back. Whenever you're ready to build something that lasts. As he reached his office building, Vincent looked up at the Morrison Construction sign gleaming in the late afternoon sun. 25 years ago, he'd been a young man with nothing but ambition and the unshakable belief that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. He'd been right about the work and determination. What he'd learned was that sometimes the biggest obstacles came from the people closest to you, and that when they did, the response had to be swift, merciless, and absolute. Vincent Morrison had built his empire on solid foundations. When those foundations were attacked, he'd shown exactly what happened to people who mistook his success for weakness. And he'd sleep well every night for the rest of his life, knowing that some betrayals carried consequences that lasted forever. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.